You'd think locking your own son and daughter-in-law out of your house would be the kind of thing that ends a family. But for me, it was the moment I started to take my life back. I can still hear Nathan's fist banging on the front door, his voice sharp with disbelief. "Mom, you can't do this! Lock us out of our own house?" I stood there in the hallway, the new brass key cool in my palm, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt steady. I slid a folder across the dining table toward Tim and Lydia. "The new tenants arrive Monday," I said, my voice calm but unyielding. "I signed the lease yesterday." Lydia, all polished nails and tight smiles, reached for the papers, but my lawyer, Evelyn Shaw, was faster. "It's done," Evelyn said, her tone as smooth as stone. "Mrs. Caldwell signed everything. It's legal." Nathan's face froze, like he was seeing a stranger instead of his mother. Lydia's eyes narrowed, but she didn't speak. "Not yet. Before I go further, let me ask. Where are you listening from? Drop it in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe so we can keep sharing stories like this. Because this one is not just about a lock or a lease. It's about what happens when you realize the people you love most have been writing you out of your own story. It started a few weeks earlier on a quiet Tuesday morning. I'd just come back from a breakfast with old teaching friends, my heart full of laughter and memories of chalkboards and Shakespeare. I walked into my kitchen, expecting the usual, the hum of the fridge, the scent of my morning tea. Instead, there it was, sitting on the dining table like a guest I hadn't invited. A glossy packet from Serenity Meadows Care Community, its edges so crisp they could cut. Next to it, a sticky note in Lydia's perfect handwriting. "Call Wednesday to confirm room." I stared at it, my breath catching. That packet wasn't just paper, it was a plan to move me out of my home, my life, without so much as asking. And in that moment, I wasn't just Vivian Caldwell, retired teacher, mother, widow. I was a woman who'd just been handed a script I hadn't written, and I wasn't about to play the part they'd cast me for. That morning, when I found the Serenity Meadows packet on my table, it wasn't just the words on that sticky note that stopped me cold. It was the way it sat there, so bold, so certain, like it had every right to be in my kitchen. I stood there, my hands still smelling faintly of the lavender soap I'd used after breakfast with my old teaching friends, and felt the walls of my home shift. Not physically, but the way they do when you realize you're not the one calling the shots anymore. This house, this two-story haven in the Virginia suburbs, has been mine since 1982. My husband, Henry, and I scraped together every penny to buy it back when our dreams were bigger than our bank account. It's not grand, just a cozy place with creaky hardwood floors, a fireplace that still smells of cedar, and a garden out back where clematis blooms every spring. Henry built a wooden bench under the oak tree before his heart gave out. A place where he'd sit and watch the world while I read poetry to him, Emily Dickinson mostly. "Hope is the thing with feathers," I'd recite, and he'd smile, his hand warm in mine. That bench is still there, weathered but proud, like it's holding on to him for me. I raised Nathan in this house. I can still see him at 5, sprawled on the living room rug, sounding out words from my old teaching books while I graded papers. We'd laugh over burnt cookies in the kitchen, the smoke alarm cheering us on. Those were the days when this place felt full, when love was as easy as opening the front door. But time has a way of changing things. Nathan grew up, moved out, and married Lydia. And somewhere along the way, this house stopped being home to them. It became a problem, a burden, something to manage. Lydia's visits started small. She'd breeze in with her expensive perfume and her planner, always suggesting changes. "This rug's a tripping hazard, Vivian. she'd say, her voice sweet but sharp, like a knife wrapped in silk. Have you thought about lighter paint? Something modern? I'd nod, sip my tea, and let it pass. But then the suggestions turned into decisions. She rearranged my kitchen cabinets once, without asking, stacking my teacups, Henry's favorites, on a shelf I couldn't reach. Nathan would just shrug, fiddling with his phone, muttering, "She's just trying to—" "Help, Mom. Help." That word started to feel like a cage. The morning I found that packet, Lydia was in the kitchen, humming as she shoved a carton of almond milk I'd never drink into the fridge. Nathan was by the back door, pretending to fix a hinge that didn't need fixing. I held the packet up, my voice quieter than I meant. "What's this?" Lydia didn't even turn around. "Oh, just a precaution," she said, light as air. "Serenity Meadows is lovely, Vivian. They've got yoga, book clubs, you'd fit right in." Nathan coughed, eyes on the floor. "We just want you safe, Mom," he said, like he was reading a script. "Safe." I nodded, the way you do when you're swallowing something bitter. But inside, I felt the ground tilt. This wasn't about safety. This was about control, about them deciding I was done living my life, done being the woman who taught Shakespeare to teenagers, who kept Henry's garden alive, who still wrote in her journal every night. They were ready to pack me away, like one of my old lesson plans, filed and forgotten. And as I stood there, the packet heavy in my hands, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let them. I stood there in my kitchen, holding that Serenity Meadows packet, and it felt heavier than it should have. Not because of the paper, but because of what it meant. Lydia's sticky note, "Call Wednesday to confirm room," wasn't a suggestion. It was a decision made without me. I looked at her, still humming as she shoved that almond milk into my fridge, and then at Nathan fussing with a perfectly good door hinge. "What's this?" I asked, my voice soft, like I was afraid of the answer. Lydia didn't even turn around. "Just a precaution," she said, her tone light, like she was talking about buying extra groceries. "Serenity Meadows is lovely, Vivian. Yoga classes, book clubs. You'd fit right in." Nathan mumbled something about keeping me safe, his eyes glued to the floor. Safe. That word again. It stung, like a slap I hadn't seen coming. I nodded, the way you do when you're trying not to let the hurt show, and set the packet back on the table. But inside, my heart was racing. I waited until they left, Lydia with her planner tucked under her arm, Nathan trailing behind like a shadow. The house was quiet again, just the hum of the fridge and the faint creak of the floorboards. I made tea, the kind Henry used to love, strong and black, and sat down with that packet. I didn't want to open it, but I had to know. The pages were glossy, full of smiling seniors playing cards, eating in a beige dining hall, posing with nurses who looked too cheerful to be real. There were brochures about aging with dignity, a map of the facility, even a billing summary. And there, on the last page, another note in Lydia's handwriting. Room single, second floor, deposit due Wednesday. Not if. When. I closed the packet, my fingers tracing the edges, like I could feel the betrayal stitched into it. I didn't cry. I'd cried enough over the years. When Henry passed, when Nathan stopped calling just to talk. This was different. This was a fire, small but growing in my chest. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Lydia said. Yoga classes, book clubs. Like my life could be boxed up and shipped to a place where I'd be safe. I got up, slipped on my robe, and opened my laptop. I don't know what made me check my bank account. Maybe a hunch, maybe something in Nathan's nervous fidgeting. I logged in, my hands shaking a little, and there it was. A transaction I hadn't made. $2,000 transferred to Serenity Meadows listed under Lydia's name. My heart stopped. I scrolled further, and that's when I saw it. Lydia's name added to my retirement account, dated 5 years back, right after my knee surgery. Nathan had used the power of attorney I'd signed for medical decisions to give her access, without telling me. I sat back, the glow of the screen cold against my face. It wasn't just about the money, it was about trust, or what was left of it. They hadn't just planned to move me out of my home. They'd reached into my life, my savings, my future, and claimed it as theirs to manage. I closed the laptop, walked to my bedroom, and pulled out my journal. I wrote one line, my pen pressing hard enough to tear the paper. They think I'm done, but I'm not. I thought of my mother's words, spoken years ago when we planted clematis in the garden together. A house isn't just walls, Vivian, she'd said. It's where you hold on to who you are. I looked out at the dark garden where Henry's bench sat under the oak, and I knew what I had to do. This house, this life, they were mine, and I was going to fight for them. I didn't sleep much after that night, the one where I saw Lydia's name on my bank account, the one where I wrote in my journal that I wasn't done. The fire in my chest wasn't just anger, it was clarity. For years I'd let things slide, swallowed my words, smiled through Lydia's suggestions and Nathan's silence. But that packet from Serenity Meadows, that $2,000 transaction, they weren't just plans. They were a line in the sand, and I was ready to step over it. The next morning I called Evelyn Shaw, my lawyer of 20 years. Her voice was steady, like always, and when I told her about the packet, the bank account, the power of attorney, she didn't hesitate. "We'll fix this, Vivian," she said. "But you need to move fast." By noon, I was in her office, signing papers to revoke Nathan's power of attorney and set up a private trust for my home and savings. I opened a new bank account, one Lydia's name would never touch, and transferred my retirement funds. Every signature felt like a stitch, sewing my life back together. But the house, that was the heart of it. This place, with its clematis garden and Henry's bench, wasn't just walls and wood. It was where I'd laughed, grieved, and built a life. I wasn't going to let it slip away. A friend from my teaching days had mentioned a property management firm, so I called them. That's how I met Clara and Ethan Hayes, a young couple in their late 20s, both preschool teachers with kind eyes and quiet voices. They came to see the house on a rainy afternoon, their shoes muddy from the garden path. Clara ran her fingers along the bookshelf in the living room, smiling at my worn copy of Dickinson's poems. "This place feels like a story," she said. Ethan nodded, pointing to Henry's bench outside. "Can that stay?" he asked. I said yes, and their faces lit up like I'd given them a treasure. I knew right then they were the ones. I signed their lease that week, but I didn't tell Nathan or Lydia. Instead, I called a locksmith. Early one morning, before the sun was up, a man named Tom arrived with his tools and changed the locks on the front and back doors. New keys, old locks. "In the trash," I told him. He nodded, no questions asked. I slipped the new keys into my pocket, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was holding my life in my hands. The storm came a few days later. I was in the kitchen, rinsing a teapot, when I heard Nathan's car pull into the driveway. The front door rattled, then stopped. A pause, then more rattling, harder this time, like the door was fighting back. "Mom!" Nathan's voice was loud, edged with panic. "Why doesn't my key work?" I dried my hands, took a breath, and opened the door. Nathan stormed in, his face red, Lydia right behind him, her heels clicking like gunfire on the hardwood. "What's going on?" Nathan demanded, his hands clenched. I didn't flinch. "I changed the locks," I said, my voice even. "The new tenants move in next week, Clara and Ethan Hayes. I signed their lease. Lydia laughed, a short, bitter sound. You're joking, she said, crossing her arms. You're throwing us out after everything we've done. Nathan sank onto the couch, like the air had gone out of him. Mom, come on. We were just trying to help. I walked to the dining table, picked up a folder and opened it. Inside was the lease, the trust documents, every paper Evelyn had. Prepared, all stamped and notarized. Help? I said, sliding the folder toward them. You added Lydia to my bank account without asking. You transferred $2,000 to Serenity Meadows. You plan to move me out of my home without a single conversation. That's not help, Nathan. That's control. Lydia's face twisted. This is elder abuse, she spat, pointing at the folder. Someone tricked you into this. You're not thinking straight. Evelyn, who'd been sitting quietly, leaned forward. Mrs. Caldwell understood every clause, she said, tapping the notary seal. Can you say the same? For your actions, Miss Bennett? Lydia froze, and that's when I played my final card. I pulled out a printed email, one I'd found late at night, digging through the trash folder on my old desktop. Lydia had used her company email, her marketing manager account, to send Serenity Meadows a donation offer, trying to secure a discount on my room. She'd even used her corporate credit card for the deposit, a clear violation of her company's rules. Lydia, I said, my voice low, I sent a copy of this to your HR department, anonymously, of course. They're investigating you now. Nathan's head snapped up, his eyes wide. You did what? He whispered. Lydia's hands shook, and she grabbed the folder, spilling my teacup across the table. The crash was loud, but not as loud as the silence that followed. You can't do this to us, she screamed. I stepped closer, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. I didn't choose strangers over family, I said. I chose myself. Something I should have done years ago. Nathan looked at me, his face a mix of shock and something softer. Regret, maybe. Lydia was still fuming, but she had no words left. I walked to the hall, opened a drawer, and pulled out a single key, tagged with Martha's name. My neighbor, Martha Evans, had agreed to let them stay in her guest room, short-term. I held the key out to Nathan. Martha's expecting you, I said. This is where you go now. Nathan took the key, his fingers brushing mine, but he didn't speak. Lydia stormed out, the door slamming behind her. Nathan lingered a moment, then followed. I closed the door, turned the new lock, and let the click echo through the house. It wasn't the sound of loss. It was the sound of freedom. The sound of that new lock clicking into place stayed with me long after Nathan and Lydia left. It wasn't just a door closing. It was a chapter ending, one I'd been too afraid to write for years. I stood in the hallway, my hand still on the knob, and let the quiet settle over me. For the first time in a long time, this house didn't feel crowded with other people's plans. It felt like mine again. The days that followed were small, deliberate acts of reclaiming. I moved the teapot to a lower shelf where I could reach it without stretching. I hung new curtains in the living room, sheer ones that let the morning light spill across the hardwood. I even rearranged Henry's old armchair, pulling it closer to the window so I could see the clematis blooming in the garden. Every change was a reminder. This was my space, my story, and I wasn't done writing. One afternoon, I knelt in the garden, my hands in the soft earth, planting a new row of clematis. Lydia had always called them messy, said they didn't add curb appeal, but to me they were hope, climbing toward the sun no matter how hard the winter had been. I added a pot of mint by the kitchen window, its sharp, fresh scent drifting in every time I opened the screen. Messy, maybe, but alive. Like me. Clara and Ethan moved in a week later. They arrived with a small trailer, a few boxes, and a bouquet of clematis they'd picked up from a nursery. "We thought it'd feel right here," Clara said, her smile, shy but genuine. Ethan carried in a wooden bookshelf, already stuffed with children's books for their preschool classes. That night they invited me for dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta and a salad, but we laughed over the table like old friends. I told them about Henry, how he'd built the bench outside after his first heart scare, determined to leave something solid behind. Clara listened, her eyes soft, and Ethan nodded like he understood. The house felt full again, not with tension, but with warmth. A month later, I got a call from Martha, my neighbor. She'd heard through a friend that Lydia had been fired from her marketing job. Apparently, that email I'd sent to her HR department had sparked an investigation. Lydia's donation to Serenity Meadows, charged to her company card, was labeled a serious misuse of resources. She'd packed her desk and left under a cloud. I didn't gloat. I just set my teacup down, the porcelain clicking softly, and let out a long breath. It wasn't revenge. It was justice, the kind that comes when truth catches up. Nathan called me that same evening. His voice was rough, like he hadn't slept. "Mom," he said, "I don't know what to do. Lydia's a mess, and we can't even cover rent." I listened, letting the silence stretch. Once, I would have rushed to fix it, to smooth things over for him. But not this time. I wired them 1 month's rent for a small apartment on the edge of town. Not a handout, not forgiveness, just a gesture. With it, I sent a note. "This isn't absolution, it's dignity. Start over." They cashed the check. No reply, no thank you. I didn't expect one. I closed my laptop and walked outside, where the clematis were blooming brighter than ever. Life took on a new rhythm after that. I started writing again, not just in my journal, but a memoir, piecing together the years I'd spent teaching, loving, losing, and now rebuilding. The first line came easily. I never stopped being the author of my life, even when others tried to erase my name. One Thursday, my phone rang, a woman named Diane from the local community center. "Vivian," she said, "we'd love for you to speak at our Elder Rights workshop. Your story's inspiring people." "Me?" I laughed, surprised by the sound of it. "I suppose I've got a few things to say," I told her. The talk was set for a month later, but before I knew it, another invitation came. This one from a national conference in Washington, D.C., focused on aging with autonomy. I started preparing, scribbling notes in my journal. My opening line was clear. Age isn't an ending, it's a new chapter, one you get to write yourself. I also set up a small scholarship fund, named the Clematis Fund, for students studying elder care and advocacy. It wasn't about money. It was about leaving something behind, a reminder that dignity matters at any age. One evening, as I sat in Henry's armchair, a letter arrived from Lydia's lawyer, full of legal jargon and veiled threats about my erratic decisions. I read it, smiled, and set it aside. It was just noise, not truth. I picked up my pen and kept writing my memoir, the words flowing like water. Outside, the garden hummed with life. Birds in the oak, mint by the window, clematis climbing higher, every day. And then sitting there, I thought about what it all meant. Life isn't about keeping everything whole, I realized. It's about learning to let the broken pieces bloom. That's what I'd done, taken the shards of betrayal, the weight of being overlooked, and turned them into something new. Not perfect, but mine. And as I looked out at the garden, at Henry's bench under the oak, I knew this. No one can take your story from you unless you let them. So don't. Write it, live it, and let it grow.